People of Reddit who work the day shift at non-haunted businesses and don't spend all your time in the woods. What's the creepiest thing you've experienced? Security at my old building came by to change the locks. Then a few hours later, security came by to change the locks. Sorry, but this one was night. Cleaning a church at 2 AM and I know a fact, I'm alone in the building. All doors to the outside are locked. Sweeping floors and all that. Suddenly I hear the church flooded with loud organ music. I don't shit myself. I follow the music, brandishing a giant mag light, not that it hurts ghosts, and get to the sanctuary, where the organ is. It's clearly being played. Turns out the girl that plays the organ lives down the street and could see sleep and had a key. Didn't know I was there. Every few months, in a department with over 20 women, we'd all come in nearly identical outfits. It was odd. We were all ages and races and styles, but there'd be a day when everyone would show up in a black skirt and red blouse. A few months later, everyone in brown slacks and a cream-colored dress shirt. A few months later, grey skirt and black sweater. We could never figure out the trigger. TV show character looking fly in that outfit the night before. A visitor to the building who appeared polished. Nothing. Always creeped me out, as it seemed to represent some sort of groupthink or collective consciousness working on us. I work as a cable tech. I once went into a basement that I still have nightmares about. There was a single pull sting type light in the center of the room, so I couldn't really see much until I turned it on, but the walls down the stairway were covered in old newspaper. I'm used to dark basements, so going to turn on the light I was not prepared for what I saw. All the walls were covered in newspapers. Every one of them was a headline about a tragedy or a murder. There was a black and white framed picture on the wall, and below it was a large child-sized porcelain doll propped up in a rocking chair with a super old looking cradle beside it. I stayed and did my job, but I still can't shake that feeling of something when I think about it. Years ago when I was a senior in high school, I had a day where I wasn't feeling too great. So I decided, as I occasionally did, to skip out on my last 2 classes and head home. That meant no school buses obviously, so I would just walk the 3 miles home. Before the age of computer cell phones, this was a pretty long, boring hike to take, so I decided to take a shortcut through some small wooded trail along the creek. Eventually I came across a dead cat lying in the middle of the trail. As I walked around it, I noticed another dead cat to my left. Looked to my right and sure enough there was another. Creeped out, I looked behind me and noticed 2 more, and yet another 2 in front of me. They were all laid out in a giant circle, with one in the middle. Almost like a half-assed pentagon. I speeded up the pace and got the hell out of there. Never took that trail again. Thinking back, a really weird thing is that there was no visible damage to any of the cats, to blood or cuts. The dead. I work in residential environments as a service technician. I go to houses and apartments and condos to do my thing. I was working in one particular condo building with over 70 floors and about 8 elevators. The elevators are in 2 groups of 4, with 2 giant elevator shafts. Just picture one giant square that is the lobby and 2 smaller rectangles in that room that are the elevator shafts. The 2 shafts are identical looking. This is relevant because it's easy to get disoriented as to which direction you are facing when you exit an elevator. Anyways, after doing a bit of work on the 65th floor unit, I realize I have to go to parking level 1 to a utility room. No big deal. I hop on the elevator and press P1 and take a lonely ride down 60 plus floors. I reach P1 level, and when the elevator doors open I hear weeping. I'm immediately worried for whoever is crying, so I start to pinpoint where the noise is coming from. It's a child crying, and since all the walls in this area are bare and concrete, the sound is echoing and seems to be coming from everywhere. Panic didn't set in until I had searched 4 corners of the square room and hadn't found anyone. Now I'm no mathematician, but I'm pretty sure 4 corners is all of them, so my mind starts racing. I decide to nope out and head back to the door that would eventually lead me to the utility room that I was supposed to be working in, which I had already passed earlier on my search. I round the corner and there I found the source of the noise. It's a little girl with straight black hair, crouched down, sobbing into her knees facing the corner. I don't know why I didn't see her before, because I already checked that corner. So either I'm mistaken, or she heard me get off the elevator and was actively moving away from me. For a moment I considered running, because that shit looked like it was straight out of The Ring, but that moment of nonsense subsided, and I asked her what's wrong. Turns out she was just lost and scared, so I escorted her back to the concierge desk so security could help her back to her room. Nothing really creepy after the fact, but for a moment, I thought she would turn around with no face or something. I'm a teacher of adult students, and one student of mine is kind of intense and creepy. Actually, she's based at another school, but specifically started attending classes at my school after meeting me. When I first started, she kept giving me welcome presents as I was new to the country. Just simple things like food, postcards, and books, which was a nice idea, but it seemed a little excessive. She added me on social media and then got upset when I didn't reply to her constant messages. I told her that I don't really use social media. Anyway, I didn't see her for a few months and figured she'd just gone back to her own school or stopped studying or whatever, and was relieved that she'd clearly got bored of me. But then last week she comes in and gives me an envelope full of photos of me during lessons that she'd taken without me knowing. I was a little weirded out, to say the least. I once found the corpse of a dead coworker. Coworker didn't come into work one day. He didn't call. He was very reliable, lived alone, didn't have many friends outside of work. So I went over to his place and convinced his landlady to let me in. I found his dead body in his armchair in front of the TV. Heart attack. He'd been dead about 12 hours at that point. 25 years later, and I still remember the grimace of pain permanently etched on his dead face, like it was yesterday. I once worked as a live-in staff member in a college dormitory. During the summer we housed a few summer school students who remained on campus, nearly 30. It may be significant to point out these students tended towards the highly academically motivated, oftentimes high-stress students, if quiet. One warm day in late June my office received a call from a concerned sibling that she and her family was unable to reach her brother who lived by himself in a room on the summer school floor. This wasn't unusual, as our office frequently dealt with students avoiding their kith and kin due to frayed nerves or general social awkwardness. Our normal protocol to check on a student is to try to reach them by our emergency contact information. Failing that, go check their room to verify they are living in the building and perhaps available then and there. Then have them call their family to verify we followed up on the original request. Also, we are to only enter a room with another staff member present to ensure personal safety of staff and students. I failed to reach this student on his room and mobile phone, and was working short-staffed, so since I was on my own I decided to pop up to his room and check on him. I arrived on his floor around 2 in the afternoon and the floor seemed deserted as I had expected. I found his room number and immediately noticed the sound of a movie playing on a TV or computer from behind the door. I knocked 3 times and announced that I was a staff member checking on his health and safety. No answer. I didn't think this was that remarkable. College students are notorious for leaving electronics running while not in the room. I checked the floor showers and bathrooms and found them deserted. I returned to his door and knocked 3 more times, waiting about 20 seconds between each knock. No answer. This is when my instincts started to buzz. I worked in residence halls a number of years as a professional and something about all the pieces of this puzzle weren't adding up. Family concerned about his health and safety, electronics running. Someone must have started them recently, within the time frame of a movie runtime. Summer school students and their idiosyncratic behavior. Something wasn't right. I was by myself, so I probably let myself get more worked up than if I was with someone else. A deserted dorm floor, even at 2 in the afternoon, oftentimes evokes capricious memories of the Overlook Hotel. I decided that for some sense of closure or sanity I needed the immediate resolution of keying into the student's room, even though I was by myself and not technically supposed to do so. I knocked on the door 1 more time for good measure, again announced myself as the hall director. I keyed into the room and my spider sense went off even stronger. The room appeared relatively vacant. The student appeared to be living out of a suitcase, which is unusual for someone staying no less than 8 weeks for a summer school session. The bedding was tussled like someone had been sleeping in it and all the lights in the room were on. And as I had suspected, there was an open laptop on a desk running on battery power playing The Matrix. But no student. I began to start rationalizing to keep from feeling unsettled. Surely the student and I had crossed paths on my way to his room. I'd never met him before, so I wouldn't recognize him otherwise. And perhaps he was just down in the lobby picking up delivery food for a late lunch. Sure, that's it. Then I turned to leave, planning on trying to reach the student later in the afternoon or that night. As I turned to leave I noticed another odd piece of evidence. The accordion closet doors, which are removed in most rooms due to disuse, particularly single rooms like his, were still in this room. And they were closed. Odd. I couldn't remember the last time I actually saw someone use those cranky, dysfunctional doors. Then my intuition spiked higher than ever. Shit. I realized I was alone in a room with a potentially suicidal student who may, in fact, have completed just that. And I'm about to be that guy who discovers the body and then has a shitstorm of paperwork and undesirable tasks, not the least of which would be calling the family back to break the news. I felt like I was talking to myself when my voice cracked as I spoke to the closed doors and announced my name and title, and that I would be opening those accordion doors in 3 seconds. I fumbled with the latch on the doors and finally managed to get them disengaged, and as I slid the doors apart, I was unprepared. I don't know what I really expected. A hanging, gunshot wound. I'll tell you what I didn't expect. A 7 feet dark-skinned Indian man staring at me embarrassingly, as though I had found his secret hangout. We stared at each other for a good 15 seconds without blinking, breathing or speaking. I finally realized what was going on and my natural emotion was disbelief. All I could think to say was, are you in here hiding from me? He looked at me and said, yeah. My heart was still racing. I turned to leave, and before I shut his door I turned back to him and said, call your sister, she's worried about you, and, frankly, I'm too. TLDR, I met an Indian in the cupboard. Literally. Scared me. I thought this was going to end much worse. Our old house was on a corner, and in lieu of a backyard had a side yard, with a small deck, that wrapped around the back. The dining room had patio doors, that lead out to the back, and we would have BBQs and such back there. When I was about 14, we only had one desktop computer, and one laptop for the family. My brother and I would fight over the desktop. That's where Diablo 2 was installed, so I would use the laptop to write music. On one particular night, my brother had a friend over, and they were downstairs doing whatever, and I was at the dining room table on the laptop. As I was wrapped up in my writing, I didn't pay much attention to my surroundings. I heard a knock on the patio door, which startled me. I looked up, expecting my brother or his friend. The basement had a door that led to the back deck as well. Standing at the door and waving was a person. Could not tell sex or age, wearing a Halloween pig mask. Thinking it was my brother or his friend I mouthed good one and gave the person the finger and they walked away. As soon as they left I went downstairs to give them shit, and to my surprise and dismay, they were both sitting on the couch playing PlayStation. They swore up and down it wasn't either of them, and there was no way one of them would have had time to get downstairs and unmask before getting on the couch. To this day, I have no idea who it was that knocked and waved. The summer after I graduated from high school, I left work early and went up to my parents' cabin in northern Michigan. Spent that night at the beach watching the sunset. Once the sun went down and it became nearly pitch black, no light pollution, I got to my car and started driving down the highway, M22. After about 10 seconds of being at speed, there was an older Tahoe, late 90s, that started riding my ass and flashing its high beams. So, I got up to about 60 in a 45. They were still on my ass. I pulled off to the side road that my parents' cabin is off of, and they took the same turn. I thought this seemed weird cause there's only about 30 to 40 houses on the road. So I went all the way to the end, which is usually a dead end, but leads to a maintenance area for the golf course nearby. Truck was still following me. At this point I was freaking out, because if I pulled into the house they'd know where we lived, and they were still following close by. I took a ton of random turns, and the truck kept following every single turn for about 15 minutes. I finally had a chance to make a turn with traffic going through the intersection. That gave me a few seconds of a head start. Pulled down a side street, went up 100 yards, turned off all of my lights and waited. Truck slowly drove by the perpendicular street and kept going. Booked it home, pulled my car around the side away from the main road, and pulled every curtain. For an 18-year-old, I was scared as hell that night. I was walking down the street when I saw a rusty nail in the road. I picked it up and threw it into an empty house's yard. Not helpful, I know. After I threw the nail, a man came out of what I thought was an empty house and shouted to me. I freaked out, thinking it was about the nail, and kept walking towards my house. The guy didn't sound mad, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. He started following me to the street and gesturing me to come over, but my gut told me to keep on walking. I get home and see from my house the empty house is now surrounded by cops. At this point I still think it's about the nail. After a while it gets worse and men in full gear show up. I found out later that the house was indeed empty. The men inside were known criminals, and I very much almost ended up a hostage. Dodged the fuck out of that bullet. You have a message from the T-Pose man. Like and sub for nothing in return.